and we move directly to the next session. So thank you for, I would like to welcome, sorry, María José Sanz, Scientific Director of the Basque Center for Climate Change, who will give a presentation in person. Thank you very much for traveling here. We'll have Giacomo Grassi, I suppose he's online. Giacomo is from the JRC, Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and Peter Iversen, LULUCF and forestry expert at the EEA. And then we'll have a response to the presentation by my colleague Adrian Leip, Head of Sector for the Bioeconomy at DG Research and Innovation of the European Commission. So we have here more speakers than in the previous session. I suppose it will be as rich as the previous one. Maria Jose, you have the floor, so we don't lose any time. We'll listen to you carefully.
Works? No? No. I'm pushing all the buttons, huh? Oh, okay. Okay, so how I come? Okay. Well, the idea today is bring you to the beautiful world of land use, and a bit of the history where we are. So the idea is that I will do a very brief introduction of some issues and how we think is perceived by policymakers or by audience which is not in the club of the scientific community that deals with land use. Then Giacomo will bring you into what are being the latest discussions about why top-down, bottom-up things are not fitting, and this may lead to the non-credible perception of the sector. And Peter will give you a little bit of taste of where the European Union is at the moment in terms of what the LULUCF regulation is being moved and so on. So why land is important? I think you've been listening why land is important in previous sessions. This graph was probably shown by Philippe, and you see that it's important because doesn't work. Okay. Because you have these fluxes and you have some storage which is quite interesting in terms of regulating the global carbon cycle. But what is the purpose of mitigation when we deal with land use? Well, the purpose is remove CO2 from the atmosphere, demonstrating that this is through an action which is anthropogenic, and therefore it needs to be additional of what nature will do by itself, right? Are you sure that this has battery or something? Okay, but it's not only to remove, it's to that this CO2 will remain sequestered for a long, long time or even forever. But we need to track those efforts, right? We need to track what we do in terms of enhance this sequestration of CO2 on the land systems that is additional to what nature will do otherwise, and to guarantee that obviously remains there. And governments have monitoring systems, and they have to do it in a way that is consistent across time, that is comparable across different countries, and that is also easy and can be implemented. And this is why when we discussed many years ago about how to measure this anthropogenic fraction of this sequestration, how we do it in a way that can be monitored year by year and can be implementable in a very cost-effective manner at the national level. And this is why IPCC developed this inventory guidance in order to make those estimates comparable. But then we had a problem because how we separate what is being enhanced by us and what is being done by nature otherwise, in a simple manner that can be done regularly every year. And then we asked the scientists, and the scientists said, that's not so easy. I mean, we don't know how to do it. We are not sure about it. So IPCC decided to have a very simple fix by the time being until science can tell us with guarantees that this is true, that these two things can be separated. And then is when the managed land was implemented, which basically says everything that is sequestered or emitted in lands that are considered to be managed by humans is anthropogenic. You know, very simple fix, very understandable by anyone, right? Of course, this is a proxy, right? And later on, we can ask the questions to many of the people in the room. Are models proxies? Probably yes, they are proxies, much more sophisticated than this one. But by the time being, this is what we have. And here you can see basically that in the managed land proxy, what you have is the direct human-induced effects. You also have some indirect human-induced effects, and also you have some natural effects, which are happening as well in these lands which are managed by humans, right? And the graph can illustrate to you what they are. What IPCC has been telling us is that the FOLU sector and the land sector in particular has a very large potentials to contribute to net emission reductions by 2030. And you have the graph here from the Sixth Assessment Report, right? Is this true? Well, we think that technically speaking, and what we know from the land sector probably is at least mostly true, or we can rely on it. And so far, we've been relying on it for many years, right? And here you have the carbon sequestration in agriculture, fundamentally in soils, the ecosystem restoration through afforestation and reforestation, and also the famous improved sustainable forest management, as many of the very promising activities. Right, and here you have, you don't need to read that, right? Because it's one of those full graphs that IPCC produced that are not suited for presentations, right? But what I want you to realize here is that one thing is the technical potential, another thing is the economic potential, and one of the potentials that is very difficult to grasp is the political feasibility and the adoption when actually you want to implement the activity, right? So and the question arises how to materialize the mitigation in a sector which is so diffuse. It has a very different structure in different countries. It has a very long history of land use depending on where you are. It has very attached to actual very fragmented social systems and so on and so on. So something that looks very easy, I plant a tree, grows, and I sequester CO2, it has a lot of constraints behind, including social, including not only economic, but also cultural, and so on and so on, that are very, very difficult to be introduced in a model for the many reasons that you probably all know. So, on the other hand, land provides multiple ecosystem services, right? So it's not only the fact that I want to sequester CO2, it's that when I manage land, I also want to get many other services. And here, for example, if you talk about SDGs, ranked in 2021, they estimated that in absence of any target mitigation efforts, if you do or you try to implement sustainable development goals, you could drive emission reductions from land which are also massive, right? As well as by biodiversity protection. So it's not only about that we should be triggered by actually mitigation. We should be triggered by what we want to do with land in a sustainable manner to produce services for the whole society. And that's much more complex than energy or than industrial processes, right? And the other point is, where are the sinks, right? They are not everywhere. They are concentrated in several areas, in several parts. I didn't ask a question to the previous speaker, but one of my questions was how you can sequence in appropriately the mitigation actions and locate it geographically and provide the incentives for optimizing what the mitigation should be. Right? Is your model able to at least, not to provide data, not to provide absolute numbers, but try to provide some guidance on what directions should be taken, right? I think one of the problems with integrated models, and I'm not that critical than Christine about that, but the point here is that I think we are not using them with the potential that they have in terms of giving us directions. We are relying too much on the actual numbers they produce. And I think that on the land use has been a problem for a while. And here you have, the three major rainforest basins, right? And you see that they are acting differently. They are behaving differently. The Amazon is still a sink. The Congo River Basin is still the major sink. And the South Asia is becoming a source, right? So you see that in different areas of the world where we have the massive forest areas, they are behaving in different ways. And we have to find ways to address what are the drivers behind this massive amount of forest and how we can sort of change the direction of those drivers. And that's not easy. For example, the other 2 weeks ago, I was doing the review of the BTR of Guyana, right? And what they were telling me is our increase in deforestation in the last 2 years is being due to the price of gold. Right? And our economy is based on gold and diamond mines. So what you will say to them? That they need to diversify their economy, they need to produce an economy because they don't have it. So, specific circumstances require specific conversations with the countries. And when you tell Guyana, protect your forest, you have to say, yes, but what is the incentive for me to protect my forest now that I have a business which is based on mining, right? And I don't have any other business. Mm-hmm. So, and now we go to the big question. Are the estimations realistic? Well, I think we all have in mind that they are not necessarily very realistic, but what we already have is trends. We know what has been happening in the past. We know the land sink is very variable. We know it depends very much on things that are regularly changing, like El Niño, La Niña, and so on. But we also suspect that there are other things happening. For example, if we go to soils, saturation, soils can be saturated, so we need to understand where saturation is higher in order not to say your expected sequestration in your agricultural soils is something which is not possible because you are 50% saturated or 70% saturated already, right? I think that was a question that Canada put to themselves in the first community of the Kyoto Protocol. But another thing is age class structure. In Europe, we know that the forests are maturing, the age class structure is maturing, and therefore we have a plateau. We don't have this increase in growth that we saw when the forests were young. This is happening also in China now, right? So as soon as we will restore our forests, as soon as we will do good afforestation and reforestation, those forests will mature. So we will have to think about what is the next activity we have to do in order to maintain certain level of things there that we desire to be put in these integrated models. How long this can be sequestered? I mean, it's not the same if we do plantations, if we optimize managed forests, if we do timber in built environment, if we try to enhance soil organic matter and so on, biochar or BECCS. So this is also another factor. I mean, what is the permanence of the activity and the result that we want to get? And I want to be fast now because otherwise. There are other challenges, right? Need of costly monitoring, uncertainty in the results. We will never get precise results out of monitoring things from biological systems. There is an underestimation of the cost, usually. We think this is cheap, but that's not necessarily cheap, right? It's not necessarily cheap and it's not necessarily fast. There is also competition for other uses. In forestry sector, for example, there is a notable tension those days that increasing the zinc and increasing the timber for energy production are contradicting each other. There is also pre-existing soil conditions that are being depleted, soil degradation. In essence, what we don't see regularly is a more integrated territorial vision, right? How we will think and visualize the territory when we go to implementation. And this requires several scales. You need to have interoperability across scales and territorial visions that are nested together and they have a clear direction. And you see here, I put some examples of what countries are saying in the reports they provide to the convention. No? For example, Germany in 2016 was saying adapting forests to climate change is particularly important for safeguarding and expanding the contributions to forestry to climate change mitigation. 2016. South Korea recently in 2020 stated that there is no land left for mitigation in their case, right? Or in the case of Portugal, they say that the implementation of adaptation measures becomes one of the critical factors for carbon neutrality targets. And finally, Norway says it's necessary to find a balance between different interests, such as food production, infrastructure, climate change, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. That's the reality of the sector. And finally, I mean, in most recent years, what we found is that in 22, Central Europe has switched from a sink of carbon to a source. Globally, in 2013-22 period, climate change reduced the land sink by 0.68 gigatons per year. Large decline on global level of land carbon sink to 2023 that we know is probably to this intense El Niño partially, but there may be other causes in there. So warming is really producing apparently a strong negative impact on the capacity of those land systems to sequester carbon. So finally, just I think we need to consider, all of us, that land systems can potentially act as a net carbon sinks, yes, but will this thing continue? Is the large decline in 2023 an indication of what is coming in the future? The model projections indicate high potentials, in particular through afforestation, reforestation, and forest management. Are models incorporating the climate thickens appropriately? I mean, they are starting to do so, but should we enhance models in terms how they incorporate those potential feedbacks? Are models able to address implementation barriers in land competition properly? Do we know how terrestrial ecosystems, in particular forests, function and will react to unprecedented climate change, especially, I mean, for example, extreme events? I mean, and we have the issue of fast release and a slow uptake that sometimes we forget. We think, you know, as we have a fire and immediately, you know, this will be uptaken by the forest. No, we have a time lag for that. And with this, I just drop these questions for the audience here, and we can pass to Philippe for continuing.
Yeah, I think. So thank you very much, María José. Please sit here. And we can go straight to Giacomo if he's online, because I understand he will complement your presentation. Same for Peter Iversen.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
We'll
Okay.
hear more also on the models, measurements, gap, inventories, and so on. Giacomo is the expert on that. Giacomo, you have the floor to complement.
Okay.
Let's be mindful of the time so that we can also have a rich discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Maria. Hi, Philippe. Can you see my slides?
Yes, I see them well.
I cannot. Can you see my slides?
Sir, we can see your slides, but you have to put them in presentation mode. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't see that. Okay. Okay. Can you see now in presentation mode?
Yes, it's okay now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. In this presentation, I will provide some reflection following up Maria's one on from the IPCC expert meeting on reconciling land use CO2 emission from the land sector that was held in July in Ispra in Italy. This is the global carbon budget you already heard this morning from Pierre, so I guess you are familiar with the numbers. On the two left box indicate anthropogenic emission, mainly from fossil fuel, partly from land. On the right, where these emissions go on top of the atmosphere. The problem is that the system boundary to define the anthropogenic emission in national inventories is fundamentally different from what global models call anthropogenic land use emission. The difference is a difference of about 7 gigatons of CO2, more than twice the whole EU emissions, and is essentially something that the global models call natural, while the country inventory called anthropogenic. The reason for that is something that already also Maria showed before, is that inventory use the IPCC guidance concept of managed land proxy. So they report all emission and removal on land defined as managed as anthropogenic, and therefore apply a broader definition of anthropogenic sink and models, both in terms of area and in terms of processes, because in this area they consider most of the so-called indirect human-induced effects, including CO2 fertilization, climate change, the impact nitrogen deposition, is treated as anthropogenic by most national inventory, while it's considered natural by global models. Is mismatch a problem? And to address this question, I use this analogy of putting the Paris Agreement into a car, where you have the driver, that is the policymaker, that decide the speed and direction, and the policymaker used two main tools: the car dashboard on the one hand, that as the national inventories provide basic information to the driver to assess where he is and to assess compliance. But then we also have the navigation system that are essentially the models, including the integrated assessment model, that provide possible routes to reach a specific destination on time. And the same exercise is done during the global stocktake, where the driver assess where he or she is compared to what is expected to be. And in that case, national inventory data and pledges are compared to models benchmark taken usually from the IPCC assessment report. The problem is that we have different system boundary, like different metrics or different languages. So the car dashboard use kilometers and the navigation system, so global models, use miles. The different metrics explain you there is no one better than the other. The two methods have been developed in different contexts with different scopes. The only mistake we should avoid is comparing one with the other, because this would be the result for the global stocktake, would be a mismatch that lead to inaccurate assessment of the future gap, resulting from an apple to orange comparison. So the question is mismatch a problem? Yes, it is a problem, because we cannot understand where we are, as the driver would be confused having miles and kilometers in the same car. Another reason why it's important, also mentioned by Maria, is that the importance of land use fluxes, so-called LULUCF, will all increase with time. This is evident in the potential mitigation from the IPCC assessment, but also from countries' INDC, which puts a lot of emphasis on the role of land use for the future. To address the mismatch that we have seen before, an expert meeting, a IPCC expert meeting, has been held in July, and we gathered three different communities. On the one side, the global carbon modeling community supporting the IPCC assessment report, including the global carbon budget, so bookkeeping models and dynamic global vegetation model, and the integrated assessment model providing emission pathways. On the other side, we had the country LULUCF greenhouse gas inventory expert, following the IPCC guidance that provide the basic information for climate policy to assess compliance with the Paris Agreement. And somehow in the middle, we also had experts from the Earth observation community that provide information for the other communities. We had representatives from 46 countries, 111 experts. The objective of the meeting was to assess essentially where we are, where we want to go, and how do we get there. So develop a common understanding of the gap, why we have this gap, the reason and the implication, then set the basis for greater collaboration between communities and get greater confidence on land use estimates. And then apply concrete steps that each community can take to achieve the common goals. The challenge is to support more credible and comparable estimates across community, supporting the next IPCC assessment report and the next global stocktake. So let's start where we are. And we started to set the scene. We started with this question that we made to 100 experts. And we don't have slide of polls here, but I leave you a couple of seconds to think in your mind how you would answer to this question. Have global emission from deforestation increased or decreased in the last 20 years? Well, we had 100 experts. I would say the best expert in their respective field. Among the best experts, and half say that deforestation has increased and half say decreased. So to a basic question that even a friend or your mom can ask you, there was a total disagreement among experts. And the same was on is LULUCF, land use, globally a source or a sink of emission? Also here there was quite a disagreement among the experts. We are in a situation in which different communities work for 20 years on the same topic, but we didn't talk each other so far. So we developed different definition and different concept. And especially on if a large part of the sink is natural or human induced, we are now in a phase of somehow mutual blaming. So the scientific community supporting the IPCC assessment report says, well, why countries don't follow my approach? And the country experts say, well, why you don't follow my approach? And then, well, but by including the natural sink in your accounts, you are overestimating the climate progress, and the net zero won't be enough to stabilize temperature. But the country may answer, well, I'm following the IPCC guidance and UNFCCC guidance. Actually, the sink that you call natural is indirectly human-induced and exists because I protect it. Well, and then at the end, each community says, well, you should definitely follow my approach. Well, the country says, well, with my measurements, which are the basis of climate policy, I cannot follow my approach because I use direct observation that do not allow to separate direct and indirect effects. So this is somehow the starting point of where we are, partly also now. We developed different language, each valid in its own context, but incompatible in a dialogue without translation. So where we want to go? Clearly, the common direction is translating to understand better each other. Translate the two languages, but which is the direction of the translation? And here we have to observe that national inventories are less flexible because they typically rely on observation, like, for example, national forest inventory, but even remote sensing to some extent, that do not allow separating the anthropogenic effects and natural effects as global models do. On the other hand, global models are more flexible and can be operationally translated into the inventory approach. At the same time, it is crucial that both the original result from global models and their translated version are available in future IPCC and global stocktake report. This is because allow, first of all, to apple-to-apple comparison of country and models approach, which somehow connects the mitigation pathway and country data to UNFCCC. At the same time, showing both approaches allow to understand the implications of the different definitions. Okay, but how in practice this translation is done? So far, with a number of publications, a quite simple but quite successful approach has been implemented. So essentially, you remember this picture from before? The translation adds the CO2 sink considered natural by models, by DGVM, to the anthropogenic flux from bookkeeping models. Is simply a different reaggregation of the current model, global model results. And the results are quite promising. You see at global level, world level, the graph on top right show the 7 gigatons difference between the continuous blue line and the orange line, so the bookkeeping models and national inventories. But once we add the natural sink on area considered managed by country, then the two lines, the dashed line, is much closer, both in terms of magnitude and trend, to what national inventories report. And this, we are in Europe, this applies also to Europe to a large extent. And this bottom graph shows also a key feature of the models, which is an interesting feature, a valuable feature, which is to detect the internal variability. These are process-based models, so they essentially are based on the balance between photosynthesis and respiration, which is driven very much by climate variability, something which is only very partly captured by national inventory, which on the other hand integrate estimates over a longer period of time. And you see that on average, the flux, the magnitude is not so different. But you see, for example, in 2023, the models, this is an average of 17 DGBM model. In 2023, the model said that actually Europe has been, for the first time in the last 20 years, a source because of the impact of climate. So something that models cannot capture with this timely resolution. It's crucial to understand that this translation has significant implication. At the global level, it reduces the remaining carbon budget as originally defined by global models. And reaching net zero emission globally would not be enough anymore to halt warming when the national inventory definition is used. How we get there? At the meeting, we discussed the following point on improving communication improvements within each community and strengthening collaboration across community. With regard to improvement possible within the national inventory communities, it has been remarked that the managed land proxy developed and confirmed in several IPC guidance remains at present the only widely applicable approach to estimate anthropogenic emission removal. The first biannual transparency report, which is due in these months, represents an occasion, especially for developing countries, to implement this proxy with greater transparency. Because so far, for example, most developing countries do not provide really information on the area of managed land that they use to estimate their fluxes. Pending availability of resources, which is often a bottleneck in many developing countries, additional voluntary information that would be helpful to facilitate understanding and compare with models could include more disaggregated stratification of activity data, enhanced methodological information to help understanding to what extent the indirect effects are captured, which depends on the approach, tier level use, and other variables. And also if and how natural disturbances are considered. And then the improvements, the discussion touched also the global models and Earth observation. I will shortly touch the global models part that can be, as I said, operationally translated to the inventory framework. Useful improvement may include enhanced accessibility to methods data. It's not enough to publish in a scientific paper, which is often not accessible to the inventory people. Then better representation of forest demographics, improved integration with Earth observation data, better documentation of CO2 fertilization effect that has been somehow challenged by some national inventory compiler, then improved consistency between anthropogenic and natural components, and disaggregation of result consistently with the national inventory. And all these are steps where these communities are already working, as shown in the update of the global carbon budget. Also, it's crucial to communicate the implication that I mentioned before for reaching the Paris Agreement temperature goals. In terms of strengthening the collaboration across community, it has been mentioned the importance of developing data sets for comparing estimates across community. An example has been presented at the meeting. It is a GRC-hosted global land use carbon flux. You may scan your phone on this QR code and they will bring you to there. And you can select all countries of the world. You can select 3 different data sets that are representative of the 3 communities that gather the IPC meeting. So one is the national inventories, the other one is the global carbon budget, where we translated the result to make it conceptually comparable to countries, and then the global forest watch. And so you can see country by country for a number of land use, you can see which are the data available and could be the basis for discussing possible reason of differences. Other steps that have been discussed include regular dialogue with the possible support of the IPC task force and inventories and the global carbon budget to improve data sharing, to develop joint protocol for translation, for example. And then crucial is engaging experts from various communities in smaller groups at regional and possibly also at national level. This could potentially be an opportunity for mutual learning and improve the accuracy and the confidence of land use estimates across communities. As a conclusion, The expert meeting has somehow sowed seeds of cooperation. A dialogue has begun among communities that have never truly interacted before. There is a strong appetite for data exchange and targeted collaboration at country level, but it's crucial that both communities keep investing in this dialogue and in improving to follow the homework list that we mentioned before. There are somehow three keywords that emerged from this meeting. One is transparency, that touched all communities. Translation, that will be done mostly from the global modeling community. And also communication of the implication that has to be done by the global modeling community, but then somehow incorporated in the national target in terms of implications. The first result of this effort will be hopefully seen in 3-4 years. We just started a dialogue. It will be a long path. To that regard, I dare to say that in my view, it is imperative that the next IPC 7 provide estimates and scenario for anthropogenic emission removal for land consistent with the national inventory definition, along with a communication of their implication for stabilizing temperature and reaching the Paris Agreement goal. An African proverb has been mentioned during the meeting as a good summary of the outcome. If you want to go fast, go alone. This has been done for 20 years, but it's not enough because we want to go far and we need to go together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giacomo, for this rich compliment to the first presentation. Let's go straight to the next one, Peter. And again, so it's now 5:07. How long is your presentation, roughly? Just
I think there's only
have time
slides.
for the questions.
There are 6 slides, I think, so it can be fast. Can I start? Okay, I hope you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, you can start.
So,
Thank you.
I'm Peter Iversen from the European Environment Agency. We compiled the EU greenhouse gas inventory. So I will only speak about the EU, and I will only speak about what we consider anthropogenic according to this Manistlan proxy. I will. Oh, sorry, I went fast. So just to give you a little bit of the background, we had before 2020 or up to 2020, in parallel to the Kyoto Protocol, LULUCF was not used for meeting this EU minus 20% target. Then we came with the Paris Agreement with the minus 50% NDC. Here the EU continued first with the sort of Kyoto style type of accounting, which with 2 commitment periods, each of 5 years, with a no debit obligation, meaning basically you compare to a reference period or a reference level, and then you basically have to do better and not worse. So not much contribution to the minus 40. This was later changed when we sort of increased the level of ambition to the minus 55 and had the climate law when we start to talk about climate neutrality by 2050, because when you consider neutrality, then we basically just include everything as we report it, because in the end, the idea is the sum should be 0. So here, it was too late to change for the first 5 years, but for the second 5 years, 26 to 29, we had sort of first a 5-year period target, and then a target for the 2030 also. These targets were calculated based on some additional contribution that should happen from the LULUCF sector. One was for to set the target for 2030. We were looking at 2016 to 18, the average, and then additional 42 million tons. And when we add that up, that became the 310 million tons. So this is where we should be in 2030. And then for the budget, it was a similar type of approach, but now for 21 to 23 average, And this, in fact, we will establish next year when we have comprehensive review. All this information you can find more in depth in this LULUCF handbook on our website, where you can download it if you have interest in this. So the EU, like all other countries with the Paris Agreement, have agreed we need to use the IPCC 2006 guidelines. But on top of that, the EU added some additional requirements to improve the reporting. So if we have a pool that contribute at least with 25%, and it's a key category, you have to move to tier 2. So the way reporting is working is tier 1 is sort of the simplest one, and then tier 2, and then tier 3. And then also we should move to use geographically explicit land use conversion data as the basis for reporting. And this means, basically that you should be able to track land, because a lot of the land use change actually have implications not only in the year it happens, but for several years after. So there you need to know the history and so on. For the new 5-year period starting in 26, since we do not compare to any sort of reference period or anything, the data for the particular year become even more important. So here we said from 28 that member states need to use tier 2 for all things, and they need to use tier 3 also for particular land that are defined in an annex. This is like areas with high carbon stocks, or areas that are especially impacted by climate change and so on. There's a long list. There was also agreed some flexibilities, including trading, including transfer to the effort sharing regulation. This is where we have agriculture, transport, and so on. But some of the flexibilities, especially those like from natural disturbances, long-term impact of climate change, would only be applicable if the EU is actually meeting its targets. And as you will see, we are not really on track to do that. Here you can see to the left, the LULUCF, each color represents a land use category. And the one to the left, what I want to say is that, so the dotted line is the sum of all the others, the LULUCF, and you see it sort of in recent years, we are down to, less than 250 million tons. And it's basically driven by the forest land, which is the orange line. If you look to the right side, you see when you take out the forest land and harvested wood products, then the others become more visible. And you see actually we have for cropland reduced emissions to almost half of what they used to be in 1990. And also for grassland, there has been this trend of reduced emissions. One thing to remember here is that if you have any land use change, then the impact are reported under the new land use. And this means any deforestation would be reported here under cropland settlements or whatever is a new land use. And that's actually almost 20 million tons per year in the EU. So in 22, we had this sink of 236 million tons, while the average of 16 to 18 was actually higher, 274. And on top of that, you have to add these 42 million tons. So you see, we are actually quite a bit behind. And this also shows up when you look at projections. And also when you look at the way both the budget from 26 to 29 and the target for 2030 are calculated, countries that have problem with one basically also have problem with the other, I would say. And most of it comes, as I mentioned before, from forest land, most of it directly from the pool we call living biomass. And we see, I think Maria, she showed some of it, but we see that some of the things they're saying, they report less tree growth. Sometimes they are related to drought, heat stress. They mentioned, of course, we can see there also more harvesting. They mentioned more salvage logging, partly linked to the next one about insect infestation. Bark beetles has caused a lot of damage, in particular in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, impacting also the most productive forest stands. And the thing is, if you kill a forest stand that are still in really good growth, then not only are you sort of losing years of good growth, but you have to start all over, remove the old trees, and then it will take another 10 years before really the new stand will be growing. So you lose a lot in this way. Forest fires mostly this is in the Mediterranean basin, but it also happens further north sometimes. This can be very big some years, 2017, I think 22. It depends a little bit whether it's in the eastern part or the western part. Another thing is afforestation. Basically since the Second World War, the forest area in the EU has increased a lot. But slowly the increase has been declining, and especially in the period we report from 1990 to the latest year, 22, we see there was a drop from around 2005 to 2008, from around 500,000 hectares to 300,000 hectares. And this basically means because from you plant a new forest before it really are growing well, maybe takes 10 years or more, depends where we are in Europe. And this means there is a lack in when we experience the problems here. And of course, this is now we are seeing the problems with less new forest. We have also more biomass per hectare. This is a natural consequence of the sink. And this means there's more respiration. And basically, since photosynthesis are not increasing when you have a sort of complete forest stand, but respiration continue to increase, then means you're slowly moving towards this saturation point. And this basically means declining net annual increment. So some of these impacts are natural, some are related to the climate change, and some are related to management. And that conclude already my presentation, so it did not take long. I hope I did not go too fast.
Thank you very much, Peter. And now we have a response by Adrian Leip from the GRTD Bioeconomy unit. And Adrian, if you can be relatively brief so we can allow a few questions, that would be nice. But there's so much to respond to, probably.
I could be very fast and just saying rewind Maria's presentation because it was just an excellent presentation, and lots of the points that I actually want to make were already there. Just to say that I'm not a LULUCF or forestry expert. I was working for many years in parallel to Giacomo at the Joint Research Center. He was doing the work on checking countries' reportings to the EU greenhouse gas inventories. On LULUCF, I was doing the same for agriculture. So it was basically a career in parallel. Now I'm working on the bioeconomy strategy, as Philippe was saying. And if we listen to the title of the session, Understanding Land, Climate and its Contribution to Climate Neutrality, I would say that's pretty close to a definition of what bioeconomy is, how the EU understands bioeconomy. A key objective of the strategy, of course, is to contribute to climate action and at the same time protect ecosystems. And so, in a nutshell, it is about solving land use competition. That is what it boils down. So I would like to touch on 3 points in my short intervention without slides, so that might be faster. So the accurate estimation of greenhouse gas emissions, so basically Giacomo's presentation, but I would like also to think about what is the interplay between science and policy, the interface of it in the context of climate action, and then of course, as I'm working on the bioeconomy, to have some reflections on the role for the bioeconomy for mitigation. Now, why do we need accurate emissions of greenhouse gases? I think that was pretty clear from the presentations already. 2 things come basically to my mind. We need to understand how much do we have to do for entering a safe operational space for humanity. I mean, that's what we are all up to. This is a question, obviously, for science, to researchers, to understand how the system works and to define science-based targets. And the second question is, how are we progressing as society, as economies? And this is not, of course, not disconnected from science, but it is largely also a political decision. How do we define progress? How do we share the burden, both on reduction of emissions or financially? How do we measure it? So this is very much something that is done by the negotiation process. And the third point, of course, is that one has to match the other. So the questions that we are asking, the answers we are giving, they have to come together. And that is actually the great work of Giacomo and colleagues, and tirelessly campaigning for a higher transparency and consistency since so many years that I could follow. And so my first response is congratulations for coming so far as we are today. Only if the numbers of what everybody should do and what everybody intends to do, and what they did do and what they will do. If this is talking about the same thing, then we can make progress. So this brings me to the questions: how do we need to design the interface between science and policy, and what is the role of models? And so it's clear that policy should be evidence-based. That's what we are doing in the European Commission, and the evidence needs to be generated independently from policy. But of course, policy doesn't translate scientific evidence one-to-one into actions. Why? Because of lack of capacity, lack of human, financial, structural resources to do the proper monitoring, control, implementation of the suitable actions. But also lack of agreement about the potential of different measures, about the fairness of burden sharing, and we had this example from India, from intergenerational distribution to inter-country justice questions, but also about priority setting in each individual context. That's also quite important. And the consensus to be reached is quite difficult and requires tough negotiations. But also this process, though being politically, needs to be based on scientific evidence by translating the results into a language that the people can understand, and that is what has been presented now. But also by being more clear about the consequences of the decisions, of the implications, as Giacomo has said. What implications does it have to ignore or include indirect effects into the emission inventories? Does it increase the risk of not meeting our objectives, and being it just the perception and what responses it triggers? What does it mean, or implications does it have to account or not for land use change legacy effects? What consequences do policy decisions have in one country from another country, or in one sector from another sector? These are all questions that research is addressing and tackling, and we have the integrated assessment models, we have the IPCC shared socioeconomic pathways, we have ensemble modeling exercises. This has all come already a very, very long way to the point being today, and they are really super useful. But I believe that researchers should go one more step more, because the interpretation of the data needs also to be done by those who fully understand what the data are. So the key is really solid what-if scenarios. What is happening when we are doing this, and does it then fulfill the objectives that we ourselves have formulated? And these must be accompanied by transparent assumptions and clear implications. And here I think I agree also what Christiane was saying before. Now, this is the role of research. I'm working on in the DG Research Innovation. So usually at this point we're making some publicity for our own projects. And myself, I was starting quite early in FP6, integrated big projects, Carbo Europe and Nitro Europe, quite some time ago. And I think they were kind of the start of a bit of this movement. My last project I was participating myself was the Verify project. And I think I understood that the granddaughters of Verify are now the project Paris, Avengers, and iClimber, and I think Rona is coordinating one, and I guess they are from the other project, people from the consortia here in the room. What I understand is they are all trying to reconcile models and inventories. This is key, and with a focus also on top-down methods, like Rona presented earlier. And actually, I was thinking about, together with Rona and Alex and Ute, how should IPCC deal with it? And we thought that for N2O, that was my field, top-down models are quite advanced, more advanced, and actually, why don't we use them as a basis for national inventories, and then use bottom-up to validate them, calibrate them, and really concentrate the resources that we require, because bottom-up estimates for N2O are quite expensive on the hotspots of mitigation. So we have really the actions focusing on mitigation. And at that time, we thought that might be a much better use of resources. And I'm really curious if this is one day or other will be realized. But let me come now to my last point, and that is to talk a little bit on bioeconomy. So how do we and how should we best manage land and the services that provide? Maria was already saying there are lots of services. Carbon sequestration in ecosystems and soils obviously is on the forefront of our minds now. Maintaining and hopefully also restoring biodiversity and genetic diversity is key. Other regulating services like clean air and water, I provided space for recreation, cultural service. It's all very important, but also biomass. We need also biomass for many purposes. We want to make products and materials, and we need to provide our food, and to a certain degree, we need it also for providing energy. And this is the role of the bioeconomy strategy, to make sure that all these needs can be satisfied together, and to address and possibly resolve the land use competition that are coming out of those different demands. Currently, we see this is not working. We see the carbon sink is decreasing. As we have also seen just in Peter's presentation, biodiversity loss is continuing. We just hear in the COP16 in Cali this being discussed. Too much primary biomass goes directly still to suboptimal uses. So we're seeing that increasingly amount of biomass is burned directly or being fed to animals, and that has severe consequences on greenhouse gas emissions, also on nitrogen pollution, public health problems as additional adverse effects. But also a lot of biomass is wasted as food waste, as biomass residual streams in the process that is not properly valorized. Biotechnology and biomanufacturing potentials are not yet sufficiently used for using it efficiently, and also the potential of the circular economy is not yet sufficiently used. But also, and that's also important, we are not sufficiently considering the demand side of it. Changes in the mobility system, changes in the diet, focusing on energy and resource efficiency. And I could spend much time in showing the progress in different fields here that we have done in the bioeconomy strategy. And it is indeed a lot that I could say, but I won't because we don't have the time, maybe another time. What we know is that things are not fast enough, and things need to be accelerated, and they need also to be done better. And this is also why the European Commission has announced to update the bioeconomy strategy next year in 25. So I'm already in my concluding points, and I would here make a plea also in view of the upcoming 7th assessment cycle, the assessments report, and I know that the outline of the 7th report is going to be discussed quite soon. And I have two demands here or questions here. First, I think we need to move away from a pure sectoral thinking towards a systems thinking. It's not to replace the sectoral assessments being done, because sectors is where the action happens. Sectors is where measures are implemented and where the monitoring and control can be done. So this is really important. But sectoral assessments, they fail to properly consider behavioral, structural, and non-technical measures. They fail to provide a comprehensive assessment of trade-offs and synergies, or on co-benefits and adverse effects, that's another language, on all aspects, environmental, social, and economic. They fail to properly assess substitution effects if we change from one process line to another one. And they fail to care for all potential losers of change, and that's important because we have to develop opportunities for them rather than saying you have to change. We have to be positive, a narrative, and have to anticipate what else is in it for them so that they are not protesting against change but embracing it themselves. And it fails also to establish a good link between human needs and sufficiency aspects, which I think is also important. And this can only be done with a systems approach. So we need both, and they need to be included in an assessment. The second point is, again, back to the bioeconomy. I think, and I hope it was clear that I at least am convinced, it needs to be recognized as the concept for sustainable land and biomass management, both for mitigation and adaptation. In the last assessment report, there was a cross working groups box on bioeconomy. This needs to be enhanced. It needs to be more space in the next assessment report. We have to understand competition for land, reinstalling the regenerative capacity of nature, and using biomass the best possible way with all the know-how we have and still need to gather through research innovation without putting pressure on land and ecosystems. I think this is one of the big challenges we have to address. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Let's, since we are really already over time, and I Everybody must be quite exhausted. There's a drink after, so if you still have some energy, I will take one question, if that's okay. Now there are 2 hands being raised. Are you staying for the drink? He's smart. He's a negotiator. He knows that I would give the floor to him. Allez, Peter, we are in your building here. Please have your question, and I would kindly ask you to ask the question to drink.
I missed part of the presentations. I'm sorry for that. So maybe my question was already answered. But some of the things Adrian mentioned, notably in terms of competition for land use, you presented quite a holistic overview of all the different strands that come into play here. You also referred to the inefficient use of biomass in our food systems, etc., which makes me wonder if we're talking about European policy and politics here. Why the elephant, and it's a big one, I think, in the room, why I haven't heard it being addressed. One of the strongest levers the European Union has, the common agricultural policy, which, I mean, we all agree, I don't know exactly what the proportion of the European budget it takes up, but it's a huge part. And, well, agriculture has a role to play in all of the strands that you mentioned, also in terms of improving the carbon sink in agriculture, etc. Where is the common agricultural policy in this discussion, and how does science also monitor what happens there on the ground and do a fact check of what politicians talk about and are afraid of in terms of talking about agriculture and food systems?
Okay, sensitive question. The short answer. Let's ask DG Agri, but they are not here. So, Adrian, can you say something about this?
I mean, I fully agree. I mean, agriculture is key, is very important. And if we are talking about bioeconomy strategy, we are very closely, since the beginning, the first strategy was in 2012 and 2018 the next time, very close cooperation with DG Agri, with DG Grow, with DG Env. So this is something that we are thinking together about how to do it. And that was the point that I was making. We have to bring farmers and everybody on the board to actually embracing the change. And we have seen that it's not a difficult issue, it's not an easy issue to solve, but there are options. And bioeconomy is also diversification of income streams by new value chains, by carbon farming, for instance. We are talking about also payment for ecosystem service, payment for biodiversity credits. Maybe this would in future help the change, saying, okay, there's something in for you also if you are going the path that is needed for addressing climate change. So I don't know if this was diplomatic enough.
Well, the verb was conditional, so I guess.
Please, María José.
I think one of the issues with the common agricultural policy was that it was not aiming to have a more systemic view of the territory and how agriculture will be fitted there in competition with other land uses. And that was never thought. I was expecting that the eco schemes will help the countries to have this more kind of integrated territorial vision. But then my surprise was that some countries were proposing some very interesting eco schemes that were rejected. So I think there is a need to go beyond the traditional thinking also in the Commission and go for a more integrated approach to land use. And I think the eco schemes could be one way, but of course you need to be more innovative and accepting some risk on which eco schemes. For example, preserving water cycle. It could be a very interesting eco scheme, right?
Good, thank you.
Thank you. I took one thing with me, and that is that you guys are going to talk to DG Agri about your vision as well.
I was about to say that the session has been recorded, and we'll provide the video to our colleagues from DG Agri, and they will love it. Thank you very much to all. Please, let's keep some energy for the next session.